are about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength of street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.
Damn, that shit was dope.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Warrior Creed and The Radical. Maajid Nawaz with my brother, the infamous Usman Raja. I got it right this time. Usman, see, I'm pointing in the right direction this time. It's the opposite.
Right direction, yeah. So,
welcome back to Warrior Creed. Today, we've got a few issues to raise with you. First off, of course, the U.S. presidential race with DeSantis wading in against Trump on Operation Warp Speed. And I'm going to show a video related to DeSantis' record on vaccines. Usman, you'll remember, bro, that I've been cautioning against believing that DeSantis is the new savior. And we'll play a video. We'll take your views on it as well, bro. And then we'll move from there to generally looking at the propaganda. I've got another video to, I think it really nicely highlights the way in which this propaganda worked, lest we forget. It's important to remember. And then also, I think we got a bit to talk about with regards to Pakistan and the latest situations there. But let's start with the Trump DeSantis situation, because it's got to a point now where they are openly campaigning against each other. So, bro, you'll remember, we forecasted this, right? We said this is what's going to happen. The basic idea is that I think those in power, the establishment, whatever word you want to use, deep state, I think they realized that they were rapidly losing the COVID mandates debate.
yeah.
And so they asked those who they felt more comfortable with, I believe, the handlers, that is, asked those politicians they felt more comfortable with to very quickly switch, pivot, and become all of a sudden anti-mandate, and so that they could outflank Trump on the right, because for their own reasons, they don't want to see Trump back in power. I am not partisan when it comes to politicians. I refuse to endorse any politician by name in particular, but I will say I've been impressed by Robert Kennedy Jr., who is running as the Democratic candidate. He won't win, but his rhetoric has been very impressive. But I don't endorse candidates. So this is not a defense of Trump. This is a reminder for everybody that all is not what it seems, and that we should not forget what people's record is, so that when these debates come around in November, we can approach them being informed. And I think that's the most important thing, because to understand that they're planning to have DeSantis outflank Trump on the right. You'll remember, bro, that I said this a while back, yeah?
Yeah.
They want DeSantis to outflank Trump on the right. So what does that mean? Well, on vaccines, as we're going to discuss now, but also on abortion and on foreign policy. On these three areas, which are all three major presidential debate topics, DeSantis sits to the right of Trump. For example, on foreign policy, DeSantis has a more hawkish, pro-war, anti-Iran stance than Trump does. Trump is no friend of Iran, but Trump has been, especially since he was no longer president, has been very vocally anti-war and anti-starting any new wars. And of note, it's worth remembering, credit where credit is due, he didn't start any new wars when he was in office.
Yeah.
So on the foreign policy question, let's always remember, people, that as much as DeSantis' record on COVID mandates, which we're going to get to, appears to be as unblemished as yours truly is in the sense that opposed the mandates from the beginning, we're going to get to this because all is not what it seems on the mandates debate. But let's start with foreign policy and say, remember something important to remember. When they try and position DeSantis as the reasonable Trump, do not forget that it's DeSantis who was a Navy lawyer in Guantanamo Bay and who faces allegations of complicitness in the torture that was meted out to those arbitrarily detained and not charged with any crime prisoners in Guantanamo Bay, which I believe has been a stain on the human rights record of humanity. And as you know, my view on this, Usman, led to even further infringements. We started by arbitrarily detaining those we believed were jihadist fighters in Guantanamo Bay. By the time we got to Syria, we were arbitrarily detaining those we believed were the wives of those fighters and the children of those fighters. In fact, we became very comfortable with those children being born in detention, such as at Camp al-Hawl in Syria and all the other camps that we've set up in Iraq to try and house ISIS captives. Children are born imprisoned as slaves, basically, if you think about it, in those camps, arbitrarily detained with no charge. We weren't happy with that. We went even further. And again, as you know, Usman, I've been trying to raise the alarm on this since before my cancellation. So people like Priti Patel no longer happy that it's not just jihadis we arbitrarily detain, not just their wives and their suspected wives and children that we arbitrarily detain, but now with all so-called illegal immigrants wanting to set up detention camps in Rwanda to house anybody that wants to leave a war zone and come to a place of relative safety. So the direction of travel, as always, when it comes to the authoritarian state is only in one direction, and it's more and more authoritarianism. Now, what's that got to do with DeSantis? DeSantis was a lawyer, Navy lawyer in Guantanamo Bay. DeSantis faces allegations of being complicit in those torture sessions there. And it's an incredibly relevant fact because the cabal that was behind the global palace coup and the COVID mandates is the same cabal that was behind the war on terror, and is the same cabal that used both emergencies or crises to try and increase the power of the state and cut back on our civil liberties even more so. So if you can place DeSantis in that cabal from the war on terror days, then I'm going to give an analogy. This is analysis, by the way, folks. Don't get angry at me. I'm giving you my analysis. You may not agree, but it's worth hearing. Yeah. As they resurrected Tony Blair from the national ID cards and the war on terror into the COVID debate to start calling for digital ID and vaccine passports. If you all remember, Tony Blair was resurrected for that purpose politically, even though it's a question as to whether anyone actually listens to the man anymore. But they tried. They tried to resurrect Tony Blair because he's been long been a fan of identity cards. So they were like, okay, let's try and use the COVID emergency again to bring in that digital ID. So it becomes relevant to understand if somebody was in the war on terror cabal, and they're also, it's the same cabal behind the global palace coup and the mandates, then there is a question mark. So if DeSantis was involved from the war on terror days, the question is, what is he doing now? Now that question can be answered on those three areas: foreign policy, abortion, and COVID mandates with regards to his attacks on Trump. Because on foreign policy, he is the pro-hawkish candidate when it comes to him and Trump. He's more in favor of the Israeli perspective when it comes to dealing with Iran than Trump is. And he's on the record. You can look this up, guys. Maajid.substack.com. We've written about this in Radical Media as well. It's all on the record. I haven't really dedicated too much time character assassinating DeSantis because that's not really my intention. My aim here is just to help everybody understand the big picture. I'm not really about going after individuals too much, though always I do regularly tend to punch up and not down. So it would still be justified because he wants to be president. We're allowed to criticize him. But still, if you look at his foreign policy stances, you'll find that they're more in line with the kind of stuff Netanyahu wants to achieve with Iran, as opposed to what Trump has taken an avowedly anti-war stance in the years during him being out of office while he's been in wilderness, to the point where, as you know, Usman, we played some videos here on Warrior Creed where he's saying that the biggest threat to national security and the global security isn't foreign countries, but our own state. If you remember those videos I played. So that's Trump's view on it. He thinks America is the biggest threat to world stability, the American government. That's what President Trump thinks. Whereas DeSantis would like for us to get behind further efforts to perhaps ratchet up the war rhetoric on Iran. I wonder perhaps even China. There are indications where he's been very hawkish on the China front as well. And again, as we all know, I'm no fan of China. So this is just so we can understand the picture. The second area is abortion. So what's happened over the last 2 weeks is President Trump has come out with a policy on abortion that is not as far to the right as DeSantis is. In fact, Trump came out and said DeSantis went too far. So we find that DeSantis is, again, to the right of Trump on abortion. And then the final one is the COVID mandates period. And today, I'll show you this headline from the New York Post. DeSantis hits Trump over warp speed COVID-19 vaccine mandate. So you see again here, DeSantis positioning himself to the right of Trump. In other words, to the more purist policy on vaccine mandate, which is the policy that we took here on Warrior Creed from the very beginning, which is this was all bullshit. Now, DeSantis is positioning himself there because what these three things show you that the debate has shifted so much that they're now vying over the base. The base no longer believes in the mandates nor the vaccines without mandates. So they're now competing to see who can keep the base because DeSantis wants to beat Trump. And Trump, obviously, it is true, came out with this rubbish Operation Warp Speed. And as Alex Jones ridiculed him in public and heckled him for, Trump still hasn't accepted. And this is now, again, as I say, credit where credit is due, criticism where criticism is due. Trump still hasn't accepted his own culpability in rolling out Operation Warp Speed and those very dangerous vaccines. So where DeSantis is correct is that Trump did initiate as president Operation Warp Speed. Where he's bullshitting everybody in this headline is twofold. One, President Trump, as a matter of record, you see here it says DeSantis hits Trump over Warp Speed COVID-19 vaccine mandates. If you click into that article, which I have done, by the way, in the small print, it has to admit, it says President Trump never supported mandates. Because as a point of fact, it just is true that President Trump never supported mandates. He did support vaccines, but not mandates. So that headline's inaccurate. But in the small print, they put that there, and that's how they always work. They cover their backsides by giving you a misleading headline as clickbait so that that's all you remember. But then if they're sued, they can say, no, we clarified he wasn't for mandates. So in that New York Post article, if you read it, it says Trump's wasn't in favor of mandates, but that doesn't matter because the political attack has now been set. But the interesting thing is, so that's where DeSantis was wrong. Where he was right is that Trump did roll out Operation Warp Speed, the vaccine policy. But again, where he was wrong is in positioning himself as the champion against all this vaccine stuff, whether it's the vaccines or the mandates. In other words, the imposition of them. That's where, again, he was wrong because DeSantis was no champion of these vaccine mandates. And what this all means is incredibly significant. But let me start by playing a video just proving the point that I've just made. And that is that DeSantis, despite how he's trying to position himself, was to the opposite. He was advocating vaccines like almost everybody else. And if he hadn't been, if he was doing what we were doing, you would have found that he'd either been killed, like some politicians were, especially in some certain African countries. I say killed, died mysteriously, right, for refusing to implement vaccines in their countries, or he'd been kicked out of his position, like clearly. Lots of people were for opposing all this stuff, but no, that's not what happened, and this is why it's not what happened. And let's not pretend otherwise. This is important because it's not only for me is it personal because I've lost an entire career in broadcasting over this stuff, and I don't tolerate people lying to us about who was standing with us at the time and who wasn't. But actually, forget the personal, forget me, take me out of it. It's important because if we really truly never want to see this happen again, we need to understand who was behind it. So this is DeSantis, by the way, claiming, as he does here, that he's going to attack Trump on his vaccines record. But this is the real DeSantis at the time and what he was saying.
Grand jury to investigate COVID-19's vaccines to determine if any lies or propaganda was pushed during the immunization campaigns. State your name for the court.
I am Ron DeSantis.
Ron DeSantis, the big question is does the vaccine work?
So my view is if you get a vaccine, the vaccines are effective, you're immune. If you are vaccinated, fully vaccinated, the chance of you getting seriously ill or dying from COVID is effectively zero.
Is the COVID-19 vaccine safe?
The vaccines protect you. Get vaccinated. Vaccine data is fantastic. It's a single dose. You take it one time. You don't have to worry about it.
Do you support the vaccine?
We're encouraged and we want to make available the vaccine. We are #1 in the country for doses per capita. So I had also the privilege to be able to actually sign for the vaccines from FedEx. We're not going to stop until every senior that wants a shot gets a shot. We're going to give them more because we want the shots to go in the arms.
Indictment charging. Indictment.
According to the indictment, has been indicted on.
So as we see, that really doesn't stand up to much scrutiny when today DeSantis is attacking Trump on those on the very record of vaccines. When you saw that video, it clearly DeSantis is engaged in a tiny bit of hypocrisy. It's a bit rich coming from him to criticize Trump for something he himself did as well. Now, what would behoove him is to come out and accept that, apologize, say he got it wrong. Look, we're not unforgiving people. Generally, it's important to accept that people make mistakes. I make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. Admit them. Admit you made a mistake. Commit to never making that mistake again. In other words, commit to never believing it's okay to put an untested chemical inside people's bodies by coercion using the power of the state. Admit that that's actually a crime against humanity, and that perhaps you are complicit, DeSantis, in advocating for that crime against humanity. And then perhaps we can start listening to how you think you're going to make amends to everybody. But let's not pretend you didn't do that, Ron DeSantis. And as you remember, Usman, we had my friend Dave Rubin on here, yeah? And he's backing, wholly backing DeSantis' campaign. And, you know, I say to everybody, including Dave, who, I'm not rude to anyone, all my friends, as you know, I'm speaking to all of them, that whole former IDW group, they're all fighting each other, but I'm speaking to all of them on speaking terms with all of them. But I say to all of them, it's important not to try and rewrite history because what just happened over those last 3 years with the COVID mandates is something that, look, it's a moment that is unprecedented. You locked down 70% of the planet using lies. Yeah, and try and remove individual rights and bodily autonomy and tell us we've got to put stuff in our bodies against our wishes, or we get sacked from our careers while we've got no other sources of income. No, we're not just going to forget that you did that. We're going to say, how do we make sure it never happens again? Because it's incredibly dangerous to allow that precedent to be set.
The problem that occurs with the logic is, though, that, as we well know, Maajid, that from the point of view of the government, you've got the ministers. So if we take the UK, for example, you've got the ministers that go to the advisors, and the advisors are informed by, well, often by corporate interest. Yeah, we know that a lot of this is funded by corporate interest. So if we look at it from the point of view that both DeSantis and Trump, they've gone to advisors because they're not scientists themselves. Yeah. And as I said, even back then when it all before
let's not forget, by the way, Usman, on your point there, who Trump appointed as his ambassador to London. It was the Johnson & Johnson guy, right? From the Johnson. So
but this is that's what I'm saying, that what we've got here is there's an acceptance of the devil we know mindset and the expectation. I remember we said this when we had Brett Weinstein on as well. We talked about the fact that, let's not get this wrong. We're not talking about John F. Kennedy here. We're not talking about that level of, we're not talking about consciousness and, because when we're discussing this, we're saying, well, look at Guantanamo, look at these situations. And in order to have that type of conversation, we'd have to actually accept that we're dealing with conscious individuals. Yeah. People that are conscious about humanity, instead of saying dog shit countries that these people are coming from to try and get into America. Yeah. Yeah. What we've got with this is that if DeSantis is fighting for the demographic on the right, the demographic on the right has a level of training that, or a thought process there that is very much about exceptionalism rather than about consciousness within the world and how the world is being affected. Now, what we can say with Trump right now is that Trump is moving forward. His policies, even when he was in, were more non-interference than administrations beforehand. Correct. Yep. But the point with this is that when we start looking at the idea of promoting exceptionalism, when DeSantis is coming in and he's coming in from a more hawkish perspective, look at the state of the American economy and also look at the movement around America right now, where Saudi are looking at taking the taking the oil away from its petrodollar hegemony that it's been under since the very beginning, and being able to say, well, actually, we'll sell our oil to whoever we want.
Yeah.
And slowly but surely, we can see the wheels coming off the machine. But like, as I said once before, what we start seeing when an ex-American president can be taken off Twitter, is people start having to recognize the national theatre play. And what I mean by this is, when you're looking at your lines on a map and you're assigning a name to it, and you're even assigning your own patriotism and exceptionalism within those lines, understand that often the people that are ruling you aren't doing that. Yeah, the people that are ruling you might be multi-millionaires from another country whose wives are saying that, well, actually, I'm a foreign national, so I don't have to pay taxes over here, and are taking 20 million out of your economy. Not mentioning anyone. But the point is with this, you have to ask the question that if you're a multi-millionaire and you're doing a job for 150,000, it's £150,000 salary, which is taxed, by the way. You're probably spending, you probably find more than that behind your sofa that you've accidentally dropped. So the point is with this, the question mark comes up. Okay, well, what purpose does it serve? Well, the purpose that it serves is the City of London is still the business base.
Hence how he came to power. I mean, our Prime Minister in Britain has not been elected. It's interesting. He's not been elected, and he replaced a Prime Minister that wasn't elected. But the Prime Minister he replaced, Liz Truss, who was voted by, of course, the Tory party members, within a week, or the shortest, however many days it was, the shortest ever term time for any Prime Minister. And because what happened was, as you've mentioned, the City of London wasn't happy with Liz Truss. So within a few days, basically started betting against the pound. This is a matter of record. Even Reuters reported it at the time. Speculators came out against the pound because they weren't happy with Liz Truss. And within a few days, the banker's candidate, former Goldman Sachs employee Rishi Sunak, replaced Liz Truss as Prime Minister. Neither of whom had a general election and asked the public about any of it.
It's interesting because it's like a sci-fi novel where you're looking at London now, and it's like Elysium, isn't it? The Matt Damon film.
Yep.
Where you've got the gentrified parts, then you've got the City of London right in the middle, and then you've got all of it, everything being pushed out, and very much this perspective of as they say, this term that I think has become sensationalized when we say deep state. It's like people are switching off. Same thing as conspiracy theory. Let's go from this: the different tariffs of life, the different stratifications of life, and if anyone who's gone beyond your analytical brainwashing system of education has actually started looking into reality. And we're not talking about red pilling here. We're actually talking about a proper education. We'll start, if you look at the media previous to the fourth industrial revolution, as we talked about before, we had the tabloids that served from a level of sophist information that would very much engage the limbic system, engage the person emotionally, but also the vernacular that the red tops were using only allowed you to think at a certain ability. But then you had the broadsheets, which were still pitching the same level of information. We had great reporters back in those days that became vilified later. The Fisks and people like that, and the Olborns and people. But there were great journalists. But even all the way through, there was always an agenda on the left and the right, and anyone that was within the system, as we were, March. But what people don't understand is that there's very, very, very few people, if at all, that have had the privileged view we've had within the multiple facets of the system. Correct. Because even when we've got the commentators that are speaking, they're speaking from a library research perspective.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is you can say to me, oh, I've read a peer researched paper, and I'm going to ask you, oh, was that on a general release? Because we know, as we know, Maajid, yeah, any paper that's worth reading, you're not just going to, it isn't low hanging fruit.
Mm.
Yeah, you're often going to have to wait a few years for it to be released.
Yeah.
The point is with this, when we get to what we're talking about here, I mean, what's the excuse that we just used, Maajid? When you said, oh, Robert Kennedy Jr., yeah, great policies, great, yeah, the guys, yeah, he's bringing the cure, but we don't expect him to get voted in. That blood burn. Anyone who's saying anything right, Bernie Sanders, Robert Kennedy, we're like, okay, let's look for the devil we know.
Yeah,
yeah,
and it's almost like it's a given. We know they're not going to win, these guys.
Yeah, well, okay. Welcome to Pakistan.
Yeah.
Welcome to you're all living in Pakistan, just different levels of it.
Correct. Yeah. No, so if these last 3 years haven't demonstrated that, I don't know what else will. You know, I've got very little tolerance left for people, and they do so. There's many of them who speak publicly about, you know, we, the democratic West, have to defend democracy by opposing, and then fill in the blanks for whatever they're trying to do in their foreign policy. And I just think, have you been asleep over the last 3 years? We have literally demonstrated, these countries, Britain, America, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand especially, have just demonstrated that literally at a drop of a hat can do stuff that Hitler did.
Yeah.
And the point is, I mean, well, people don't like those analogies. This isn't an analogy. This is literally what happened. They did stuff that Hitler did. It's not an analogy. That's just a matter of record.
Yeah, but the problem is here, Maajid, that if people are concerned about things, then do you want to get rid of the problem? And this takes us back to the point that we always make, which is that they get the adrenaline rush. They even get told, it's like, here's the problem, your solution. But here's your solution. Here's your acceptable solution.
Yeah.
Yeah. Remember, your individuality is out of a menu book. Yeah, whether now I'm going to sound outdated because I haven't used this analogy in 10 years or 15 years of dawah, Maajid. Do you see what I mean? So the menu book analogy I used to say was, like, you open that menu book and you've got a bit of Beyonce and you've got a bit of Hulk Hogan and you've got a bit of Sylvester Stallone, and you're taking bits of everything to come up with what you think is unique individuality.
Yeah.
But guess what? Yeah, the fact that you think it's feminine to stick fake eyelashes on and wear pink is because that is within a structure. That isn't because you feel like you're a woman. Do you see what I mean? It's all within a menu.
When you say within a structure, what do you mean by that?
The information that you know has been taught to you. So A, B, C, D. Yeah, A, B, C. When you're looking around, when you look around, the object that you see, the value that it's given has been taught to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, the use of that object has been taught to you. But not just that. If the use of the object has been taught to you, the use of the object also relates to the environment around it. Yeah. And it also relates to, and if it relates to the environment around it, where do you now fit into that environment?
Yeah.
Yes. And Joe, we talked about the structure point of view. Where do you now fit into this environment? Are you, okay, so now we can even use the analogy of the presidents here.
Yeah.
Where we've got the level of, okay, this is the strong man president, and he comes in with the flavor of the anti-hero.
Yeah.
I'm going to take care of you, and if they mess with us, we'll bomb them. Yeah. It can feel very secure because you've been trained in the concept of the anti-hero. You've been trained to, if it's my anti-hero, it's fine. If it's their anti-hero, remember when you had Osama bin Laden before 9/11.
Yeah, when he was fighting the Soviets.
when he was fighting the Soviets, he was the anti-hero for a certain demographic.
Yep.
And it's whether it's your anti-hero or their anti-hero. But the problem is, accepting an anti-hero is a problem to start with. Because traditionally, the hero he had to be infallible. And what that means is that it doesn't matter if he made a mistake, but you know that if he made a mistake, the mistake was still made with him having the right intention. It was just the fact that he didn't know where the dominoes were going to fall.
Yeah.
Now you've got the guy that finishes the cigarette and throws it into the puddle of petrol.
Yeah.
And he goes, well.
Yeah, it's a difference between making a mistake, being in error while trying, and being negligent and not even caring in the first place.
And not even caring.
Yeah.
And that's what we've come to expect.
Yeah.
But the problem is, now that we've got our entire societies being victims of that. Now look, this Ukraine war, the crisis of the crisis of living issue that we've got, where people can't afford to heat their homes, where people can't afford to buy food. And what we then start seeing is the crime rate going up and a level of desperation. And then, okay, well, how are we going to cure this? We need more security. We need more policing. We need more restriction. Yeah, every road in London is a 20 mile per hour road. Yeah. So if you want to get across London now, it's going to take you longer than if you want to go to a town 60 miles away.
Yep. Which is the reality. It's very difficult to get across London.
But then what this comes down to is if people were able to think, they would look and they would say, okay, how do I solve this problem? But instead, what you're getting, that someone's coming around with a t-shirt and wear this, join our club, go and lock yourself up against a lamppost and slow down the traffic on the motorway.
Yep.
Go and and this is the whole, all of this woke nonsense that we've got going on, where people are taking on their own victim. And it's very interesting because when you take on your own victimhood, there's no concern about what's going on internationally. When you've got your own victimhood, there's no concern about what's happening to the Uyghurs, the Rohingya. Yeah, there's no concern about what's going on in Nigeria because you've got your own victimhood. And the great thing with this is you don't just take your own victimhood, comes with its own little pack that's got the history of that victimhood. And so, so does the trans woman inherit the struggle of the suffragettes? Is that part of your information pack?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you represent Rosa Parks on the bus because you're a woman, but I identify as black as well now? So I'm. Which bit of history do you want to take? And we get to a point where everything's a parody of reality.
So this is interesting because linking what you're saying to the introduction about knowing where each of these candidates sits so we can evaluate reality critically and not be just, as much as is possible, receiving information that we're given and then coming to conclusions that clearly were predetermined for us by those that were giving us the information that we were granted access to. So the only way that you can try and minimize basically being told what to think and then thinking it is to try as much as possible to be a critical thinker. So connecting what you're saying to the beginning of this conversation about the vaccines, here's a video that shows just how it's done, how that cookie is cut. And it's interesting because looking back now, I think very few of you will not recognize the propaganda in what I'm about to show you. But at the time, very few of you did recognize the propaganda in what I'm about to show you. And that's Usman's point. Why? That now, looking back at what I'm about to show you, it's obvious that it was just appalling. But at the time we were going through it, very few people were able to step out of the hysteria and look at it from the outside and say, that's hysteria. Now, this video is related to the first one. It's related to the vaccine debate, but it's actually about how propaganda works. It's a collage. Usman, bro, it's 11 minutes, but it's really worth watching. So I'm going to play it, and then we can come back on this as well, yeah?
People can discern the truth from the misinformation. And we want to make sure that everyone understands that no one's safe till everyone's safe.
No one is safe.
No one is safe.
No one is safe. No one is safe.
No one is safe.
Nobody's safe.
No one is safe.
Nobody is safe.
This is a post 9/11 axiom. Safer, but not yet safe.
No one is safe. No one is safe. No one is safe. No one is safe from COVID-19 until everyone is safe.
If the whole world isn't safe, none of us are safe.
No one is safe.
No one is safe. Nobody is safe
until we're all safe.
Health experts have been saying nobody is safe.
Nobody is safe until everybody is safe.
Nobody is safe.
Science is clear.
None of us are safe.
There is no safety.
No one is safe. No one is safe. No one is safe. No one is safe until everyone is safe.
No one's safe.
Nobody is safe.
Nobody's safe.
No one's safe.
We'll never be safe
until we're all safe.
We are never going to be safe.
99.5% of people are safe and will survive COVID-19.
The only positive thing out of this is we should be able to manufacture a lot of vaccines, and
Nobody will be safe if not everybody is vaccinated.
you don't have a choice.
As long as not everybody is vaccinated, nobody will be safe.
Normalcy only returns when we've largely vaccinated the entire global population. So
Get the fucking vaccine!
You need to get vaccinated, and if you don't, you are going to die.
I know you're vaccinated. You're the smart ones, but you know there's people out there who aren't listening to God and what God wants. You know who they are.
The unvaccinated people.
My message to unvaccinated Americans is this.
If you are the unvaccinated, you are the problem.
You're the
Condemn them, shame them, blame them. The only people that you can blame are the unvaccinated.
Frankly, we can't trust the unvaccinated.
They should not be part of polite society.
The lunatics who won't take COVID vaccines walking around lawfully unvaccinated? That's psychotic.
If you're willing to walk among us unvaccinated, you are an enemy. You have no right not to be vaccinated. You don't have the right to contaminate someone else.
You can't go around pointing a gun in somebody's face, which is what it is when people are unvaccinated.
They are all idiots and losers.
This is a real movement in this country against the unvaccinated.
Jennifer Aniston is cutting non-vaccinated people out of her life.
Unrepentant unvaccinated.
They should be removed from the hospital.
Those who refuse to be vaccinated should be denied health care.
Vaccinated person having a heart attack, yes, come right on in. We'll take care of you. Unvaccinated guy, rest in peace, Wheezy.
Some doctors are saying they'll refuse treatment for people who choose not to get the shot.
Why are hospital and ICU resources going to them?
Morons who will not get the shot. The unvaccinated clowns. Idiots who think that they can do their own research. Don't do any of your own research.
Doing your own research is associated with conspiracy theory circles. This go-it-alone approach, doing your own research, it can have serious consequences. You should get prison time for even questioning the vaccines.
Can we all stop saying, I need to do my own research?
That phrase, do your own research, 4 words, 4 little words that are hurting America. Doing your own research hurts America. Everybody has a supercomputer in their hand that empowers them to do their own research, and that's the problem. You must not do your own research.
I need to do my own research. I don't ever understand what that means. I'm doing my own research.
You can't do your own research unless you're a scientist. Do your own research.
Maybe you've told yourself you're playing it safe, you just want to wait and see since this is a new vaccine. No.
Roll the up and get the vaccine.
Unvaccinated people spread the virus.
Get the vaccine, you dopes.
Don't be a get yourself vaccinated. That's just all there is to it.
There's no excuse.
No excuse for being unvaccinated.
There's no rational and no emotional argument that adds up against getting your damn shot. There just isn't.
But you made a conscious decision not to get the vaccine.
I also have natural immunity. So for me, personally, this vaccine poses a greater risk than a benefit. I'm also not a risk to any of you. Let's look at the science.
So we see that the natural infection is given greater protection or slightly greater protection than vaccination.
This is a vaccine that was created to prevent severity of disease and to prevent hospitalizations. But the vaccine does not prevent you from getting COVID and does not prevent you from
transmitting
Oh my
COVID.
goodness.
Reality, and
No,
we have seen
that's
that.
not so. Come on.
No,
You've been at Fox TV
you
too
have to
long.
enjoy it.
I
So
just really
again,
don't think that we should
again,
allow this
Sonny,
kind of misinformation.
Get the vaccine so that you don't get COVID-19. We poke ya while we poke ya, so you don't get corona. When we poke ya, well, we know you're gonna be safe from COVID infecting you.
The virus stops with every vaccinated person.
Do it so you stop spreading this terrible disease.
And that vaccine, a key goal is to stop the transmission so that you get almost no infection going on whatsoever.
Expectation for vaccines is not to get infected.
A vaccinated person gets exposed to the virus does not infect them.
When the virus gets to you, you stop it.
You're not going to catch it, you're not going to get sick, you're not going to transmit it.
The vaccine is absolutely bulletproof.
Vaccines block you from getting and giving the virus.
100% effective in preventing COVID.
A vaccine prevents you from getting infected.
It is to keep you from getting it and then spreading it.
We have the ability to stop COVID in its tracks.
You're not going to get COVID if you have these vaccinations.
Biden tests positive for COVID-19.
When people are vaccinated, they can feel safe that they are not going to get infected.
Dr. Fauci tests positive for COVID-19.
Vaccinated people do not carry the virus, don't get sick.
CDC director tests positive for COVID-19.
Get your vaccine.
Pfizer CEO tests positive for COVID. Pfizer CEO tests positive for COVID again. CDC director tests positive for COVID again. Fauci tests positive for COVID again. Joe Biden tests positive for COVID again.
Cases up 258%. The majority of these cases are among the vaccinated.
And this area is the most vaccinated part of Massachusetts.
So many fully vaccinated people are testing positive.
So people here are a bit angry.
We are all really concerned about what this means long term.
I was vaccinated and I got COVID, and almost everyone we know with vaccinations had at least one bout of it.
Our vaccines work better than we could have possibly hoped they would work.
We are not the problem. The problem are the unvaccinated.
The unvaccinated threat.
Unvaccinated people are a threat, a direct threat.
The threat to all of us.
The unvaccinated are a risk to all of us.
People have a right to be protected from the unvaccinated.
Maybe there should be laws that allow them to be kept out of the building.
So at least, thankfully, they're not breathing the same air. Their freedom to breathe will diminish. Start firing the unvaccinated.
If you don't vaccinate, you'll be fired.
Time to come down on the unvaccinated.
They should be banned from the VA, banned from restaurants, banned from other businesses and colleges.
Companies should not treat us as equals.
Place unvaccinated people under arrest.
It's the unvaccinated that has put America in the place that it is.
We are losing freedom because people are unvaccinated.
Anger towards the unvaccinated. I'm furious at the unvaccinated.
Frustrated with Americans still not vaccinated.
Not to be vaccinated seems criminal.
Suspects face years behind bars for coughing on police officers.
Their freedom.
For them charged with terrorist threats.
You have no individual rights when it comes to the vaccine.
Really, you're killing other people.
We're being attacked by unvaccinated.
It's the unvaccinated who aren't wearing masks. It's the unvaccinated who aren't social distancing. It's the unvaccinated going to crowded indoor events.
It is not your right as an American citizen to catch and transmit a potentially fatal infection.
So screw your freedom. We can coerce you.
You're not going to be able to travel to see your family.
If someone in your family isn't vaccinated, should you ask them not to show up?
Yes, you really shouldn't have anyone unvaccinated come to dinner. That's just a huge risk.
If you want to come out into public, if you want to live your life, you need to get the vaccination.
It's time for people to see vaccination as literally necessary.
You should have to show that you're vaccinated in order to go places.
Unvaccinated tennis player can't travel to the U.S.
If you're not vaccinated, you're not welcome.
Our patience is wearing thin.
Why hasn't the president focused more on scolding the unvaccinated?
The refusal has cost all of us.
Continued damage the unvaccinated are doing to themselves and the country.
How come migrants are allowed to come into this country unvaccinated, but world-class tennis players are not?
You know,
And back to our lead story, the pandemic of the unvaccinated. Fact is, this is the pandemic of the unvaccinated.
Experts call it
pandemic of the unvaccinated.
Still a pandemic of the unvaccinated.
The disease of the unvaccinated.
It is the unvaccinated who are the problem. Period. End of story.
The unvaccinated also put our economy at risk.
This is a tyranny of the unvaccinated right now.
The unvaccinated, not the vaccinated, the unvaccinated. That's the problem. That's the pandemic of the unvaccinated.
Pandemic of the unvaccinated.
unvaccinated.
All this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated.
The only pandemic we have is among the unvaccinated. Pandemic because the unvaccinated.
When you get the vaccine, you will not die. That's right. That's right.
This is a simple, basic proposition. If you're vaccinated, you're not going to die.
If you're vaccinated, you don't have a risk. It's as simple as black and white.
You are not going to die if you are vaccinated. That's it, full stop.
You're unvaccinated, you're at risk. You're vaccinated, you're safe.
A majority of Americans dying from coronavirus are vaccinated. COVID-19 isn't a pandemic of the unvaccinated anymore.
We didn't really understand the fatality rate. We didn't understand that it's a fairly low fatality rate and that it's a disease mainly of the elderly, kind of like fluism, although a bit different.
We have two Americas, an unvaccinated, at-risk America and a vaccinated America.
I wear my vaccinated necklace all the time to say I'm vaccinated.
You, the vaccinated, are the last best hope to overcome the unvaccinated minority.
I need you to be my apostles. I need you to go out and talk about it.
We are seeking to enlist you in a benevolent conspiracy to join in the unfinished war against
The sins of the unvaccinated.
And it's a war.
a forever war. The war against COVID-19.
The vaccine hesitancy on Earth, too, has the potential to compromise all of the hard-fought progress that we've made here on Earth 1.
This is the greatest threat to life that we have ever faced.
Metropolitan areas are now banning all private gatherings. This bar owner arrested for reopening illegally.
Unvaccinated, we are looking at a winter of severe illness and death.
For yourselves, your families.
If the unvaccinated are not to blame, who is?
If only we had a vaccine against BS.
A vital.
So as you saw there in that 11-minute video, we are, as you were just saying, Usman, bro, we were literally told what to think. And that video makes it abundantly clear, especially as the messages, as you saw when it went through each one of the stages of the messaging, they were all repeating the same mantra from their various platforms at the same time. And yet anyone that challenged that mantra, this is what happened to them. So to your point, yes, we were quite literally told what to think there.
But the issue is because we have to get the balance, don't we? We have to get that middle point of the balance. Because if we're talking about critical thinking with this, it's like, who are we supposed to believe? Remember, Maajid, the point with this was until you started doing your research and came in with valid, informed opinions. Remember I said to you there was the usual, as I said, the usual imbeciles of the vaccine's doing this. But they're the guys that are, there is a level of like it's finding the informed sources and not just being reactive, or otherwise, there are things where you need to take penicillin. If you go in and you've got a staph infection and the doctor gives you an antibiotic for it, these are things that will save your life. Do you see what I mean? So that the balance then becomes, okay, where is the informed opinion? Now there was a difference because remember you were bringing
basically.
You were bringing experts on. The same way, because all the way through with whether it was during the CT efforts, all the way there was. Research is a different thing. When you do research, there's a way of doing it. But the problem we get to now, COVID is an example of how you have been lied to. It's like there is a level of questioning that needs to happen, which it can sound like, well, this is difficult because I'm living in a consensus-based society, so I believe what I'm told, because obviously I voted within a consensus, and that means I trust. Part of like voting in a government is the fact that you can trust that they're going to get the flour in for you to get your bread. You're not the one that has to source the flour for Warburtons or whoever make your loaf that you're going to go and buy. There's a chain that there's a factory belt chain,
and it all relies
you're
on
at the end of that chain.
Yeah.
Expecting to get delivered to you what you need so you can, and remember that social contract is there so you can go and build houses, be an electrician, be a plumber, be a father, be a mother. Now, if I have to be a researcher as well as that, then we have to be researchers. That's what we have to do. That's part of the work. That's always been part of the work.
But everyone can't do that.
Everyone can't do that, and everyone isn't that.
Yeah.
Yeah, whether you've got some comedian, some commentator, some sports personality, some alternate therapy person telling you something. We're not talking about pseudoscience. We're talking about informed opinion and creating the little communal bubbles where you can go to and get that informed opinion. Yeah, maybe this is a time for, we keep using that word, the people's reset.
Yeah.
Where we have something where the people can take either their local administration or the administration to account. We used to have those at work, didn't we? They were called trade unions.
Yeah, and then they got destroyed. But on the point of lying, that raises the question: what else have we been lied to about? So here you see from the G7 in Japan, President Joe Biden announces a new package of military aid of up to $375 million to Ukraine. Zelensky, still touring the world asking for money to continue that war, went to Japan to meet the G7, and there Biden agreed. And I've put in my tweet here, meanwhile, America is hurtling toward a debt ceiling crisis, while Biden insists to House Leader Kevin McCarthy, House Speaker that is, that no savings at all can be made. But what Kevin McCarthy has said is House Speaker McCarthy says the debt ceiling talks can't resume until Biden returns from the G7 summit. There's a real crisis. But on the question of Ukraine, after that vaccine debacle that we've just played you the video around, this was the next thing that happened, the Ukraine war. And again, as you remember, Usman, we were not being given the full picture. And so this all begs the question, how much of what we think is going on in the real world is actually going on, and how much are we being fed narratives and told what to think?
But we live in a great time right now, don't we? Because the Ukraine conflict, I think you can pretty much grab someone with a reasonable GCSE education and say to them, okay, look, here are the dots, just connect them. I'm gonna leave you to do your research and just connect the dots here. Just look at Russia's situation, look at Ukraine's situation, look at NATO, and I want you to research this and then come back to me with what you think. I'm not gonna add anything to that. And when they go and research, they're gonna look and they're gonna say, well, there was plenty of warnings here. There was things said here that were quite reasonable that we could have just given into. They were very reasonable, in fact.
Yeah, before the war, yeah, definitely.
But what we get with this is we've got something that's actually affected the entire planet. And when you look at it, you go, you have to just sit there and say to yourself, okay, either I just accept that I'm being bamboozled here and all of the stresses and strains that I'm getting, because the point is here, Maajid, that we're not saying this to try and sound intellectual, to try and put judgment on someone, because when they go and sit down and realize where their stresses and strains are from, when they pick up their bills, when they look at inflation, when they look at all of this, they're going to go, oh, wait a minute. A percentage of this is from this Ukraine conflict.
Yeah.
A high percentage of it is from this Ukraine conflict.
Just as paying for furlough is also the whole lockdown. We're paying for that now through our taxes.
Yeah.
Everyone's got huge tax bills.
Huge tax bills. Everyone's suffering. But guess who isn't suffering? Those at the top.
Yeah.
Those who aren't British citizens, so I don't have to pay my 20 million in tax.
Exactly.
Do you see what I mean?
Now, on the topic of, again, I think this is a good theme for the show today, which is what people think versus what they think and what they're told to think. Our colleague Glenn Greenwald, who we've had on the show, put up a series of tweets about a poll, the Harris-Harvard poll. and its results, polling the American public on what they think, are quite interesting. So here's the first opening gambit by Glenn, and he states a newly released Harris-Harvard poll conclusively demonstrates how radically out of touch is liberal corporate media with the views of Americans. It's not just that the corporate media rejects Americans' views, they don't permit those views even to be heard. And then he lists some of the interesting poll results. So I'm going to talk you through these, Usman. And again, it all relates to what we're talking about. So you can bring this back to any of the points you're making. But here's slide 1. And it's going to give us the following. To start, majorities of Americans say it's false that, quote, Trump colluded with Russia and that the Steele dossier is also false. Now, we know that since before this poll even, and we had this featured on last week's show, this whole Russia collusion stuff's been blown out of the water because of the Durham report that just came out by this apparently independent investigator, and it pretty much exonerated Trump. I mean, we spoke about this last week. So you can see from this first slide by Glenn's tweet thread that the majority of Americans already believed that anyway before the Durham report. So to continue reading, in other words, they view the story that the US media aggressively centered for 3 years, that is the Russia story, as a hoax and a fraud. Yet NBC and CNN won't even air this view. So that's slide 1. Let's move to 2. Another interesting result from this Harris-Harvard poll. Majorities of Americans also believe that Hunter Biden engaged in criminal influence peddling using his father's name. The FBI, Americans also believe the FBI is not investigating these crimes. And thirdly, that Joe Biden participated in Hunter's illegal influence peddling and profiteering schemes. So the majority of Americans believe all these 3 points, according to the Harris-Harvard poll. And again, related to Ukraine, it's important to mention at this juncture that the Hunter Biden laptop story that was denied by not only the mainstream corporatist press, but also former intelligence officials, around 50 of them. And instead, this was labeled as a Russian disinformation operation. It's all turned out to be true. But it links to Ukraine because some of the criminal allegations that are to be found in Hunter Biden's laptop, which is actually his laptop, relate to, for example, his work in Ukraine on the board of various companies, funding biolabs on the border with Russia. And Rosemont Seneca is one of the companies that is allegedly involved in this. And again, this opens up the question. If China were opening around 50 biolabs on Mexico's border with Texas, then a bit like perhaps going into Iraq, invading a country to stop weapons of mass destruction, do you not think America would invade Mexico if it felt that there were 50 biolabs on its border? So at the end, and they were Chinese labs. So Russia, looking at these bioweapons labs, allegedly, on their border in Ukraine, obviously Putin's like, what is this? Why you guys got all these labs here? And you want to expand NATO onto my border with these biolabs? So the Hunter Biden laptop story is relevant to all of that. The third slide, Glenn Greenwald's slide there. Americans also believe that the materials on the Hunter Biden laptop are real and are not and never were Russian disinformation. So again, Americans view the claim that the US corporate media and CIA spread for weeks before the 2020 election to help Biden win was a fraud. That story that the laptop was Russian disinformation. Slide number 4. Large majorities of Americans say that they are not surprised to learn that the FBI abused its power in the 2016 Trump-Russia probe to help Biden. Large majorities also say they are deeply worried about the U.S. security state's manipulation of U.S. politics and sweeping reform is needed. Slide 5. Large majorities of Americans have serious doubts about Biden's mental fitness to be president and believe he is too old. Unsurprisingly, then, Trump leads Biden by 7 points for 2024, and he leads Kamala Harris by 11 points. In other words, even more than he leads Biden. Can the media be more out of touch? So what we got here, number 6, the 3 political figures who are viewed most favorably by Americans are, no surprise here, Elon Musk, then Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis. Bernie Sanders is next. Musk has by far the highest favorability gap, plus 14. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC's, is minus 13, Mitch McConnell is minus 24. And then I'll show you the last one. Only 40% of Democrat voters say they intend to vote for Biden in the Democratic primary. For whatever reason, the poll excluded the challenger, who is near 20%, RFK Jr. Surprise, surprise, he wasn't even in the questions to gauge the American public's opinion about what they thought about RFK Jr., Robert Kennedy Jr. I wonder why. But even many Democrats say Biden lacks mental fitness and they don't want to vote for him. So these are poll results that you and I would be not surprised by too much on this show. But of course, the corporatist media hasn't shown any of that, that the majority of the public are, according to corporate media, the vast majority of the public are conspiracy theorists. Because if you're going to go by those results, they all fit into what the corporatist media is calling conspiracy theory.
Okay, so if
all of that,
if we start looking at this, then Maajid, the thing is, we've got to paint the picture for everyone with this, and in order to paint the picture, I think it's where the faith has been put is that these next generations that are coming up will take on a message, take on a certain viewpoint, because what we've had previous to this, that the concept of how I feel, let's go to, I always say they got the balance right with the 80s and the 90s with sex, drugs, and rock and roll. You had a level of rebellion where you could tap into it, and you build the paradigm of religion that has a dominion whereby you're like, if you're religious, you're like, I'm doing this for Deus. I'm doing this for the Theos. Yeah. Whatever your Theos is called. Yeah. And if you're religious, you're doing that. But everyone else, but even when you're doing that, you're doing it for this Deus where you're sacrificing. So there's a concept of dominion there. Yeah. And then you've got the liberals, the artists, and this is where we see these, where we saw first, remember these first rung of philosophers that rebelled against the dominion, like Foucault and Nietzsche and all of this. But that thought process of rebelling, we see during the 80s, during the 90s, even the early 2000s with, or the 2000s with the new atheist movement, you see it, and the balance is there, and the how I feel thing is working. Yeah. But then there's an overstep with it. Because what you get is, as the digital age really peaked, the fourth industrial revolution came in. Yeah. You notice the oversteps here, Marge. Yeah. Push button COVID. Remember, we talked about this. The overstep with COVID, you push the button, 67% of humanity's behind closed doors. Yep. But also along, you can see the overstep with the media. Let's look at the traditional moral truth stories that we had before. Yeah, the stories that we grew up on, original Star trilogy. We had the Lord of the Rings trilogy. We had the old Indiana Jones, whatever it was. But if you look at, we get to now, fourth industrial revolution, and you start seeing there's a move towards individuality, how I feel, very much keeping the individual within an emotional response, a view of themselves. So a narcissism that pretends to be empathetic to the struggle of others, which is where the victimhood within the intersectionality comes in. Yeah. So the idea of, and I saw an interesting discussion between our friend Jordan Peterson and an individual who described himself as being part of the left. And he was saying to Jordan, well, surely if someone's an adult and they feel like it, they feel like they're in the wrong body, they should be able to go and get parts of their body removed. Surely that's okay. And you see, Jordan, because you have to have a higher level of societal collective logic to say to someone, No, and you can see Jordan's like, how do I answer this individual? Because this individual, like the logic is very much related to
Individualism.
individualism,
my choice.
But the point being that individualism is based on what that person's been taught.
Yeah.
Remember, back in the day, it used to be.
In other words, just to quickly explain what you've just said for how I've understood, at least, just to interrupt for 1 second, I'll let you carry on.
Okay, so
just to say that individualism you're saying is what people have been taught.
But remember, we talked about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Yeah.
Yeah.
Remember, you'd have the parent who might be going to work in a suit, and then the kid at home is that he's got a leather jacket on, he's got long hair, he's listening to rock and roll. Yeah. And that was rebellion. That was considered rebellion. It was like, I need to test myself through a certain level of rebellion. Yeah.
If you look back to Happy Days, remember that TV show?
Yeah, Happy Days. The Fonz.
What if you look at the Fonz now? He looks like your everyday family-friendly guy.
Yeah.
But he was cast in that show as the rebel, and everyone else is in 50s gear, and the Fonz was in the leather jacket and the white t-shirt and jeans, and the motorbike with the greasy comb back hair. That was the rebel, and everyone else with their side parting, their polo shirts and their chinos and their shoes in 50s outfits.
Yeah.
In these diners were seen as the standard people. So, but now in 2023, you look back to Happy Days and watch the character of the Fonz, and it's almost nostalgic. What happened to that guy? Because he was a nice guy.
Fonz would be a
conservative,
he'd be a right-wing conservative now, wouldn't he? Because they'd say that he's
far right neo-Nazis. What he'd be.
Far right neo. But the issue being that when you're not looking at, it's very simple, isn't it? The human experience, and this is the difficult part of this. It's very, 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 very simple. Family, friends, good food, unity, connection. But instead, if you start taking it out of that and taking it to imagination, you have to remember that all of this, when you sit there, you're taught to want something, you're taught to imagine. And remember that when they're advertising to you, they're not saying to you, even when they show you food, if that food's crunchy, so even though crunching something isn't difficult, you might get to that plate of food that's been advertised to you and go, that's a lot crunchier than I thought. It takes a little bit more effort. I never knew I'd need a drink with it. They don't show you that on the advert. But I'm using a very simple analogy that people can relate to. Well, what do you think happens when you cut something off your body that you're not supposed to cut off, and your body's pre-programmed to sew that wound up? You're going to have to take drugs. You're going to have to do. This is not. We're not talking about pieces of plastic that you can remold here. But what ends up happening is when you're living in a society whereby everything's got planned obsolescence, meaning that back in the day, the first light bulbs were designed to last for a lifetime. And then they figured out, well, wait a minute.
We can't make money off that.
What's that?
They figured out we can't make money off that.
Yeah, you can't make money off that. So you put a filament in there that's only going to literally last a certain amount of hours and the filament burns out.
Yeah.
So you've got to go out and buy another light bulb. Yeah.
Like
but that's also the way parenthood, Maajid.
Yeah.
The ideas of parenthood, the parent is now they're saying to, why is it that the school teacher with the crazy ideas that the school teachers go, I'm going to go in, I'm going to have a rainbow flag in my nursery, and I'm going to have to teach in a subversive way that these little children that have been entrusted to me, these 3-year-olds, don't go back to their parents and tell them that I've put the option in front of them of you can be a boy or a girl, or you can be whatever you want. And what ends up happening with this is when you bring in ambiguity for structures that are just very simply there for you to connect. Structures are very simply there for you to connect. It's like there's a certain level of, if you're on a beach, you can get away with a pair of shorts, just a pair of shorts, walking along, enjoying it. But if I'm in the middle of my town centre and I turn up and I say, well, it's hot, I'm going to get a security guard coming up to me and going, excuse me, sir.
They'll tell you there's a no shirtless policy in this shop.
Yeah, you have to. Yeah, you can't walk around like that. But the problem is now, what if I feel like it? I feel hot, and I feel like I'm on a beach, even though I'm in the middle of a shopping center in the middle of winter. But I feel you're not understanding my truth. And in fact, my truth is, because I feel like I'm on a beach, I want everyone else to feel like I'm on a beach. Let's get a beach ball out. Let's enjoy it. Come on, everyone. Let's have fun. What's wrong with fun? In fact, that's a good movement. I might start that movement.
What's wrong with fun?
I've got the logic. Yeah, what's wrong with fun?
What's wrong with fun? Yeah.
Exactly. But that's the argument, isn't it? What's wrong with fun? But the problem is with this, that when you actually get down to it, the fun is fun something quiet, fun something intimate, fun something about brotherhood. Why is it that we have that rule, Maajid? Every week we have to have dinner.
Yeah.
Does it? Every week. It has to be done.
We have fun with those lamb chops.
Yeah, exactly.
The key principle here I'm gleaning is the following, and that is that whatever somebody thinks they've arrived at through their individual scrutiny, like this individualism point, that I chose to do this, why can't you let me do it? That point that you're saying you heard somebody make to Jordan, I choose to chop something off my body. What's that got to do with you? The key point here is that nothing in this sense that we're discussing, nothing is ever just your choice, because before you made that choice, there were a whole bunch of stuff that happened to you outside of your control that it's impossible for you to isolate from the choice you're making, including your primary socialization from your parents, your secondary socialization from your school, what you were taught in those two socializations, the media propaganda around you and how it influences you. We've just shown the video on the COVID stuff. I mean, how many of you thought you were making a choice during the COVID era now to look back and think, oh, wow, I made the wrong choice? So you're saying I'm making this choice, let me. And the question is, well, how much of the choice you think you're making is actually your choice versus all these other factors? I've just named 3 of them. There's lots more than that. I've mentioned primary and secondary socialization and propaganda. Let's also say economic status as an example, right? There's 4 things right off the bat for you. There's probably loads more. How much of your choice is influenced by those 4 before you even begin thinking about which choices you have, and therefore before you even make the choice based upon the ones you think you have?
And the ramifications of the choice you make. Why is it that I can't walk into someone's house like I could in the 80s? Yeah. In the 80s, it was completely acceptable. Remember, people used to have ashtrays in their house, even if they didn't smoke themselves.
Yep.
Because it was expected that if a guest comes round, that they could light up in your house and smoke.
That's right.
Yeah.
Crazy days.
Crazy. People used to do it in the office. You watch those old
the worst is on airplanes. You'd be stuck on an airplane cabin with a child and somebody's in the seat next to you just puffing away.
Exactly. But this is the point. And you've just given the analogy, Maajid.
Yeah.
Because every single thing you're doing is smoking around my child.
Yeah.
And that's the point. That's the answer to this. That look, you can't smoke around my child.
Yeah.
You can't, because what you're breathing out, my child's breathing in.
Yeah.
And what's happening now is that people are starting to, you see, the system thought, the corporate media thought that you could sell a lifestyle with what I feel. What they haven't figured out with this is, they might have been able to get the balance right if they had a minimum payment to every single individual on the planet to make them lazy and comfortable.
Yeah.
Yep. You had to
universal
make
basic
sure that
income is the plan for that.
Because the coercive persuasion aspect with this, because they thought, okay, societal pressure will be enough coercive persuasion to convince people. But what's ended up happening with this, Maajid, now is that what you've got is we're in a system now where the youth are now, they're becoming more conservative, Maajid.
Correct.
Yeah. Like we've seen with Andrew Tate, for example. Yeah.
Yep.
Now, at first it was the conservatism the traditional conservatism with some problematic things before he became Muslim. Yeah, before.
Yeah.
But obviously, from our perspective, before he became now what we've got is it's the same things that have been pitched on the streets of London that we've been pitching on the streets of London for the last 2 decades. But the difference is with this that when it comes down to it, we've got this thing where people are going. There's even a level where they're going towards a Victorian conservatism. Remember, we talked about this the other day, where the idea of a woman and a mother is not being appreciated and understanding that, well, actually, sorry, you got this wrong, because the woman, the mother, is the highest position.
This is the concern I have with some of the return to fundamentalism in certain political discourse. And it's that, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater with everything we do have, and recognize that there are certain reasons why we moved away from fundamentalisms, and they are good reasons. And that actually it's about arriving at that balance that we talk about. Because you mentioned the matriarch situation. I mean, I'm concerned because what they're doing, those that are funding, let's bring this back to a political analogy because it will make sense. Those that are funding DeSantis to outflank Trump to the right, where Trump has said he's gone too far on abortion. One of the problems in the American debate is they're saying that even if a woman is raped and the child is affecting her health, those that are on that end of the abortion debate still want to make it murder to have an abortion, where the child might damage her health and she's been raped, for example. They don't want any exception. Now, that's an example where you've got to. So it's why Trump said, no, DeSantis has gone too far. I don't think DeSantis is precisely on that point, but there is clearly, that's part of the US debate is that example. And I think that serves the point well, which is we don't want to have a backlash to this to such an extent that we then start the Ferris wheel all over again, right? And we become those Victorian Puritans that then you need another liberal movement to try and resist, because it went the other way, which is what they're hoping for, by the way.
But this is the point with this. So what we've got with this now is that the genie's out of the bottle, so to speak. And I use that analogy on purpose from the context of the East. Yeah. Because in the East, we know we've grown up with the matriarchs. Even though, you've seen Maajid with me and my brothers, even my younger brothers, they're all, remember, we've an absence of a father.
Bro, anyone who sees me on the weekends with my youngest, Jibril, will see me at his football, at his BMX, at the ramps. I take him to the ramps. He's on his BMX. Will see me every weekend without fail. Bro, because you try and contact me weekends. I say to you, what? I say, no, I'm with my mother.
And
exactly. Stays with me over the weekend, and I take her with me to the BMX. I take her with me to Jibril's BMX and to his football. And that's how we roll. It's with our family. It's with our parents.
And let me get you to repeat, Margie, what you repeated, what we were talking about at the dinner table on Sunday, when we were talking about that Pakistani mother, that Pakistani woman, because we've grown up with those lionesses. These aren't the false eyelash wearing, bounce down the street with a ponytail and a puffer jacket type of. These are women that stuck it through. That made sure, sacrificed for their kids. And it's a different type of understanding. It's a different, and the thing that this comes down to is when we're talking about going backwards with this. I think the issue with this is when you've had Edward Bernays is asked by the cigarette companies that how do we sell cigarettes to women? And here's this is where modern advertising comes from, and his advertising campaign is based on the cigarette being the phallic symbol. Straight away from that point of view, we went straight into the problem with that we've got here now, which is the idea of femininity, the idea of feminine and masculine being a display instead of something intrinsic, instead of something valued. Do you see what I mean?
Look,
instead of something symbiotic. The idea that the man, there's a traditional understanding in Islam that the man is outwardly majestic, strong, but when he has children, he becomes inwardly merciful.
Yeah.
And then there's the reverse. It says with the mother, with the woman, you have they're outwardly merciful, but then when they have children, they become inwardly majestic. Now, what it's actually saying is that on that level, the mother, the matriarch, inwardly majestic is true power. Do you see? And that's why it talks about the idea that behind, like we had with the Ottoman sultans, when you look behind them, there was always their mothers that were guiding the empire.
Well, without giving away too much, because I know you're in the middle of it, but those of you who do follow The Mandalorian, it's interesting to know what happens in season 3. Have you started?
Don't go there, Maajid.
It's really relevant to what you're saying, but I won't give you a spoiler there. I am going to move it to the Pakistani woman point you made, because it also helps us bring it to the last topic for the show. It's Imran Khan in Pakistan, because talking about strong Pakistani women, this is currently Pakistan's public enemy number 1. There is a nationwide manhunt for her. The last I checked, Khadija Shah is her name. She's the granddaughter of a former army chief in Pakistan. The entire army establishment is hunting her because they accuse her of being one of the ringleaders behind the pro-Imran Khan protests while he was arrested. And as you remember from last week's show, or perhaps the week before, Imran Khan said that any of the vandalism that occurred during those protests were false flag operations by the security state to frame PTI party operatives. Well, the update is one of the PTI party operatives they're trying to frame is Khadija Shah. So there's a national woman hunt. I want to call it manhunt. A woman hunt for this woman, Khadija Shah, who was at the protests. They raided her family home. They arrested her brother, her husband, and her other relatives who were in the house. They've taken them until she surrenders herself. They then raided the safe house that she was hiding in, but she had escaped out the window.
Yeah.
They found only those that were the owners of the flat. They got them and they said, where is she? Oh, she's just escaped. But Khadija Shah is being framed because in the audio message, I wish I'd actually screen grabbed the audio message, but it's in Urdu anyway, so it wouldn't have made much sense to people. But in the audio message she released from location unknown, she said, I did not participate in the burning or ransacking of Jinnah House, which is the army house that was was subjected to an arson attack during the protesting Imran Khan's arrest. And she said, I was simply at the protest. But they're trying to make Khadija Shah the face, this woman here, the face of the pro-Imran Khan protests and the face of what they're trying to fix and say she was the one that burnt Jinnah House. She was the ringleader. So what I was impressed by in the message she put out was her strength. I mean, they've arrested her husband, her brother. They raided her house. They've arrested all her relatives. And yet she was defiant. She was making very clear where she stands. She wasn't backing down. She was saying, this wasn't me. You guys are trying to frame me. And by the way, I am a supporter of Imran Khan. She goes, look, I'm not a member of PTI. She made that very clear as well. She's not a member of the party. She goes, I don't hold any office. I am just a Pakistani citizen, a granddaughter of the former chief of army staff, one of your own, who's come to the conclusion that all of you guys are trying to stitch up the only guy in this country is trying to remove the corruption from Pakistan, and that's Imran Khan. So there's an example, see, of the point you were just making about the strong woman, right? I've been impressed by this woman's strength. And it does, again, she's a fashion designer, by the way. It defies a lot of the stereotypes people have of Pakistani women. And the thing is, you and I know, because we grew up with that Pakistani. And if you look at, not that you have to, but if you look at Radical and in there, I talk a lot about my mother from this regard, because it's anyone who's Pakistani knows that the strong matriarchal presence is, you don't fear so much your dad, you fear the rolling pin from your mum, right? Think of Italian mothers to understand what I'm talking about, right? So now in that sense, why is that important? Because to your point, Usman, that it's that ultimately why we're doing what we're doing, either we're narcissists or we have goodness for goodness sake, because the two can be conflated and often are by people that are narcissists, right? That a narcissist will do activism claiming they're doing it for other people, but as you've mentioned earlier, the victimhood mentality is what's driving them, and really they're doing it for themselves because they place themselves as at the center of all victimhood, and that's narcissism. Now, the goodness for goodness sake and the love for love's sake, in other words, helping people because you love people and want to help them because you see yourself in them because we're all one.
Yeah.
That approach, which is the opposite of narcissism, can only be born of the maternal instinct. That's where it comes from. Because if you strip everything else away, ultimately it's the mother that loves and rears the baby because of that same instinct of seeing herself in that child and caring for that child more than than she even cares for herself, because that child's future is her future. She is the future that child will become. So in that sense, it's why it's so important to remember that this pendulum, it can swing the other way. We don't want to end up in this patriarchal kind of notion of Victorian Puritanism, where we then start insisting that women have to stay at home and, don't have the right to work. I remind everybody, we know this as Muslims, but the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salam, his first wife, the only one he remained for most of his life, though he's married to her, only her, that was a polygamous society.
Yeah, a monogamous relationship. Yeah.
He remained monogamous to her. She was older than him and was his boss because she was the owner of the business. And before he married her, she hired him as staff and then fell in love with him and married him. So you got an older woman that was his boss, Khadija, radiallahu anha, and he remained monogamous to her until her death. And only after her death did he engage in polygamy like all other Arabs and all other the world actually were doing at the time. So I think that points to, even for those of you who were in doubt on the Muslim side, always remember that balance. Khadija radiallahu anha is a woman that if you're ever disparaging women in that way, you're going to disparage al-Mu'mineen, the mother of the believers, in that sense as well.
Yeah, but this is the issue with this, isn't it? Because what we're getting to now is where we're taking on a very judgmental view, which is because the new movement isn't recognizing the internal strength that's there, from that perspective of not just the mother, the wife, the support. So, and the idea here that when you look at, remember, we're coming from an Eastern perspective here, where it's always had that matriarchal value there.
Watch season 3 of The Mandalorian, man. You got to watch season 3. We've got to update everyone once I can't speak about it on Warrior Creek because you haven't watched the dad thing.
No, but I told you I'm waiting for this. I'm waiting. It's all finished now, yeah.
Yeah. Binge watch it. Listen, because I've got. Again, just to announce for everyone, I will be traveling for the second leg of the wedding that I went to Belgrade for, and that's I'm going to the US because the groom, my wife's brother, is obviously American. The wife was from Serbia. So I'm leaving the day after tomorrow. But so the next two Warrior Creeds, I'll be broadcasting perhaps just from a laptop somewhere in my room in the US. But you've got those 2 weeks, so watch it, get it all done.
Yeah, no, that's going to be done. Yeah.
Right. Any last reflections on the situation in Pakistan before we call it to an end today? We've been over. It's been an hour and a half. So,
well, I think with Pakistan right now, There was a piece that I saw with an individual actually bringing up the points that we brought up a few months ago about the Chinese taking on the Confucian methodology and the concept of morality within the people. And I thought it was a very interesting point that he was making on there, because it actually relates to, he was talking about Pakistan from the point of view of, when we're talking about collective morality, that is the question in terms of whether people are going to find the solidarity to go out and fight against the monolith that the military presents to them. Yeah, because what you've got with this is, it is this huge monolith of even if you go out collectively, even if there's a view and the person's got a 6-shooter, are the 1,000 people going to move?
Yeah,
the 6 people still have to die. But the interesting point with this was that what he was pointing at with this was the idea of like societal morality, which connects to the traditional perspective we just talked about. See what we just talked about there with the idea of the woman, the man, roles, trust. Yep. What this actually comes down to is that when you have societal structure, that societal structure then becomes a valuable thing. What we haven't understood with the How I Feel movement is that the How I Feel movement is based on getting rid of structures, but you didn't realize that you needed the structure. You didn't realize why the headboard on your bed was there until you jumped on your bed and banged your head against the wall.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? That each part of the structure has a purpose. And because you didn't design it, because it might have been the whole human civilizational project to design that structure that you have the privilege to live within, just because you feel something that was actually, you have to remember, you are a product of the general knowledge that was selectively taught to you.
Yep.
Yeah,
Correct.
the only reason you think differently to your parents is because you were taught something different, not because you've come to a state of enlightenment.
It's called Rockefeller education.
Yeah.
Now, listen, on that note, we've got to go. Next, so as usual, it's been an hour and a half, folks. Thank you very much for joining us. Next Tuesday, same time. I think I'll be in the US time zone, Eastern Standard Time. So I think it should be fine because it'll be 10 a.m., right? Yeah. So I think you will join us at 3 and I'll join at 10 a.m. US time. So Warrior Crew come out at the same time. And as always, go to Radical Media, maajidnawaz.substack.com if you want the sound file or podcast file for these shows. I'll be sending those out, sort of with a delay function via Radical Media, because obviously we want you all to tune in live on Rumble first. And spread word. I mean, you guys, look, if you like the content, what we're trying to do here, do recognize that we are probably the most shadow banned content creators currently on the internet in the English language.
Definitely, without it's shocking, amazing.
And our content isn't that bad. You know what I mean? It's good content. So spread word, folks. Try and help us out a bit, because as you can see, we're up against it here. But we're not, our point is we will speak truth.
Yeah.
By speaking the truth, and our intentions are there. We hope that people over the long term see we're not anti or pro anything. We're not anti-Trump or pro-Trump. We're not anti this or that. What we're about is speaking the truth for the sake of love, to say that everyone, that it doesn't have to be this way. It can be better. This is how it can be better. And we hope that you understand that our track record, the work we've done to this point, demonstrates we're just trying to make things better. It's not easy going up, for example, against terrorism the way we did. Yeah. We're trying to make things better and are still here trying to do that. Whether it was the COVID mandates, wasn't easy going up against all that. Now, that means sometimes we're speaking the truth against the current. There's a big current at the moment, as you saw there with Glenn Greenwald's poll, that Elon Musk is the most popular brand in America at the moment. Doesn't bother me when I say I don't trust that, he's appointed a World Economic Forum director as now CEO of Twitter. I will say that whether he's popular or not, but what I know is if he does something right, I'll still say, as you know, Usman, credit where credit is due. So we're just trying to speak the truth. We're not vindictive. We're not trying to go after anyone for no reason. We're saying, okay, he did something good there. We'll say he did something good. He did something bad there. We'll say he did something bad there, which is what critical thinking is. And we're hoping everybody adopts that. It will become harder for you to be hoodwinked by propaganda if we all started doing a bit more of that. So help us spread word of Warrior Creed. Help us keep this thing going. We don't mind. We take it on the chin. People want to shadow ban us. We're going to keep going anyway. But your help will always be appreciated. And until next week. All right, bro, Usman, we'll see you next week as well, yeah?
Yep.
Thank you, everybody. Until next week, this is Warrior Creed, Maajid Nawaz, and my bro, Usman Raja.
Take care.
I'm about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength. Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge. Quick service announcement brought to you in part by